Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance into this incredible dialogue with our panel of the new Untouchables. We're recording this on Friday, November 7th, 2025, at approximately 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And joined, as he is each and every week, leading the way, I appreciate the William K. Black, our resident in chief of all things corruption and fraud at the highest levels. And of course, we're in the middle of it. So we appreciate his diagnosis and his direction as always. Immediately below him is Lewis Clark, the executive director of the Government Accountability Project. And to his immediate right, of course, is Paul Peltier, formerly the white-collar prosecutor of the Department of Justice and currently in private practice and also adjunct professor at George Washington University. And then at the lower part of the screen is June Carbone, the Rabina Chair of Law, Science, and Technology at the University of Minnesota. And it's been an incredible week, guys. And I think I want to start with just some sort of reactions to what's happening in the national sort of zeitgeist, if you will. And June, I'd like to propose this question to you first, considering a lot of things took shape in this Tuesday, let's call it a blue wave, obviously in a lot of important elections, a lot of races that are emanating, obviously, the nation's sort of, let's say, turn the tables on all things Trump and everything that we've been in the midst of for some time. But I think the thing that really stood out to me was, among some of the surprises in these races, was the Democratic judges being reappointed to the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. I'm curious what your thoughts are on the backside of what took place on Tuesday.
Well, here's how I think we have to think about it. We have an overwhelming rejection of Trump. The exciting thing is that people are getting it. I mean, if Vladimir Putin were to describe the dream of his imagination, it would be Donald Trump. It would be somebody who comes in and destroys what makes America great because of combination of narcissism and idiocy and ideology. Not that Trump is an ideologue, but Trump is the captive of the people who give him the most money. They have an agenda. And the American people are left out of that. And they have woken up to the fact that somebody is taking a sledgehammer to the White House, to our government, to the economy, to things people need to live. Now, here's the question. What's the Democratic alternative? So we got a resounding no to the narcissist in chief, plotting, as Kamala Harris said in the debates, plotting his revenge in the White House while the rest of the country dissolves. What's the Democratic agenda? And it doesn't really have one. Mondami is the most radical, but frankly, free buses and food co-ops, government-run grocery stores. This is the beginning. What's the model? And here's my pitch on how you have to think about it. We had an industrial revolution. That industrial revolution went from building railroads, connecting us all, modernizing agriculture. We replaced terrible plows. Bill said they're worse than the ones in the Roman Empire, the plows we had at the beginning of the colonial era. Hey, we got steel, we got railroads, we got the automobile, we made people's lives better. And we produced a Gilded Age in which the robber barons didn't just rip people off. They moved from squeezing their customers to having recurrent intensifying financial crises, because the best way to make money is to own the bank, as Bill has pointed out. And so you get the concentration of wealth, you get the squeezing of the average citizen, you get corruption, you get a culture of greed, and you get a society that ultimately self-destructs. The populism of the late 19th century in Europe became Nazism or Stalinism. And it took two world wars and the Great Depression to get to the point. What happened after World War II was the win-win era. The capitalists got a large, stable workforce. The workers got better jobs with security on which they could raise families. And you had the government mediating and putting in place the infrastructure that allowed this to happen. Where are we now? A second industrial revolution, the information age, and we are in its early stages. We have torn down the guardrails that keep things in check. We have a new generation of robber barons, of oligarchs, who are squeezing the average people. But here's the secret: they don't really need us. They don't need large, stable workforces. They are trying to automate everything in creation. The high paid workers in the system, the tech workers, their skills are outmoded within 10 years. Within 10 years, 50% of tech workers leave the field. They do well because they've acquired a variety of skills they can take elsewhere. But no one is secure. And what's the Democratic alternative? High-speed rail. Um, you know, government subsidized grocery stores in New York City. What's the government alternative? And here's my answer. I don't hear anybody talking about it, though you see just the beginnings on the more radical parts of the internet. What we have created is a system that we hail because of the dynamism of the oligarchs. Mark Zuckerberg made famous the phrase, move fast and break things. That's what they're doing repeatedly. And that allows them to be the puppet masters, who get Donald Trump on their side, who control most of Congress, who have now weaponized social media to produce the election outcomes of their choice. How do we fight back? Well, the vision has to be a citizenry that is as secure and dynamic as the robber barons. How do you get there? What you have to start thinking about is how do we empower the citizenry? And again, what you need is you need to go back to school free card. When you get laid off, you get retooled at free community colleges. You need community organizations. One of the things Republicans do and have done since Reagan is you go out there and you look at the places most affected by the wave of mechanization that has destroyed companies, moved them overseas, or moved them from the north to the south. That's something that started happening in the late 50s. And you ask, what could you put there instead? The answer, the only thing left are fundamentalist churches because Republicans kill everything else. They're waging a war on public schools. Why? Because they're the counterpoint to the system that keeps them in power. So it is rebuilding community, having Democratic campaign coffers fund things like organizations in rural communities that Republicans don't control, that are the counterpoint for making people aware. And by the way, in the meantime, taking care of our children, financing local businesses, helping the food co-ops in rural areas to get on their feet, emphasizing the financing outside the control of the robber barons. That rebuilding process is what we need to be focused on.
Wow. And I think, Paul, besides going out and making a bumper sticker that says June Carbone for president, I do think just exactly like June had just laid out, I'm like, it's time through the new Untouchables is to bulldoze the misery of tyranny to unleash the renaissance of possibility. And I know you were really close and personal with the governorship race in Virginia. And you also had a lot of, awareness of things that were happening nationwide. What are your thoughts on the other side of the election, Paul?
Well, I think a lot like June does. I think that this was an absolute reaction to what people are seeing and feeling. I think that obviously the voters were feeling not kind to Trump all across America. I think that the election in Pennsylvania of the judges was remarkable, not in that the judges were reappointed, because that's sort of a normal process. No matter who you have, it's very hard to dislodge judges when they're just up for reappointment. You just basically you have to vote them out, which rarely happens. But there was a huge cash infusion to do that. I mean, millions and millions of dollars. And it was rejected by the voters. I thought that was fantastic. I think the bigger story, although I would like to talk about the Governor Spanberg and the rest of the Democratic elected governors. But I think the bigger story in Virginia, in terms of how deep the resentment to what Trump has going, is, Virginia is a purple state. It's not a blue state. When we saw Mike Johnson and everybody say, "Oh, well, we had a blue governor elected in a blue state," that's not what went on here. We have 100 delegate seats here in Virginia. 40 before the election, 48 of the 100 were occupied by Republicans. It's almost a right down the middle state. 13 Republican incumbent delegates lost their election and were replaced by Democratic delegates. That is a huge, huge number. That doesn't happen ever in Virginia. So the notion that it's just a blue state voting blue is not what happened on that day. So I find that to be tremendously encouraging. On sort of a national front, you have to realize, number one, there are over 300,000 federal employees living in Virginia. And so when you have the deep and wide problems that Trump has thrown on federal employees, it's reflective in the vote as well when you have that many federal employees. So I think, and what Pritzker and to some extent in California, they've been asking for governors to stand up to Trump. And that has not really been happening en masse. Now I think that we have with Mikey Sherrill in New Jersey, with Healy in Massachusetts, with Spanberger here, with Pritzker, with California. I think we're going to see that Governors Association, at least it relates to Democrats, start to create this wall, which is going to, like we've talked about, produce whistleblowers in state courts that are going to, in state systems that are going to have an impact in the state. So I think that those people, having been former federal employees, Mikey Sherrill have been, I think she was a former federal prosecutor. When you have those people in charge, I think that, and these are very smart, deeply engaged women. And I think that this is going to help that blue wall that Pritzker's been acting about in terms of the Democratic governors. So I think that's very encouraging from my perspective. Of course, on the other side, we have a U.S. attorney in Miami, my old office, starting a Trumper, starting up a grand jury investigation of a bunch of people who were involved in the Russia investigation and involved in the search warrant of his house. It looks like they're gearing up a grand jury in Fort Pierce, which is just a terrible thing. But I guess we'll have to wait and see what goes on. But that's going to keep happening. But I think, like June says, America has spoken. I think that when Trump has the day before election, has a party at Mar-a-Lago, which was opulent in every way that you
Great Gatsby.
Yeah, but of course, opulent in every way that Mar-a-Lago can be opulent. I mean, which of course it's tacky and trashy, but people look at that and they resent it, right? Then you have, like June said, you have the oligarchs all over the all over the news constantly. What's going on? What is happening with America? Trump sits there and says, well, grocery prices are down and gas. It's none of it's true. And people know that. People go. They have to feed their families. People know that. So I think it's a tremendous reaction to what Americans are truly seeing. And I think the only thing I fear is that the Supreme Court's going to save Trump again, and they're going to rule these tariffs to be unconstitutional. And that's probably the best news Trump could ever get. I don't know if he realizes it, but that's probably the best news he could ever get. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on the election.
Well, in addition to that, the headlines today were the mayor of Washington, D.C. being investigated, I guess, by having some sort of relationship with, of all things, I'm not sure if it was Qatar. I think it was a Qatar, in addition to all things that Trump's in the midst of. But I want to turn this to you, Lewis. I've been thinking about you a lot on so many fronts, but particularly the front page of the New York Times this morning had also had an expose on the sort of status at the Department of Defense, given all of these never to be seen before, cuts of the generals and the hierarchy of the Department of Defense by Pete Hegseth, and then. There's so many other elements, but I know I wanted to add this as well. We're seeing, of course, 10% cutbacks of air traffic at the nation's busiest airports regarding air traffic control as well. These are absolutely incredibly important functions of the, our institutions, our government, the power structure, and everything else. And obviously you and the Government Accountability Project are right in the middle of some of these things. I'm looking forward to your assessment and reaction.
Well, I think also it's important to throw out here the sandwich guy, which was fantastic news yesterday.
A fraud section employee when he did that. I will say.
Yes.
I'm proud of him.
Yes, and because this is the reaction that I saw in the election, and certainly in terms of on the ground, in terms of our juries, is that people are not willing to to countenance the continued abuse of authority on the part of the Department of Justice, and certainly on the part of Defense Secretary. And so I think that that's really what also happened this week as well, is that people are not willing to essentially see their justice system degraded, as it has been. And I think the Pennsylvania vote is a good example of that as well. I mean, there is certainly on the part of the population a great sense of injustice that is bubbling up, but it's not the cynicism of let's just throw the bums out, but it's rather evaluating whether the people that are being put up to possibly being thrown out, are they indeed providing justice for the American people? And I think that the electorate said they're providing justice, and we're going to defend that. So I thought that was really a corner that got turned. So the cynicism of being alienated, but not being smart about how you're going to deal with that alienation, I think was I think it was also reflective in 2 million people voting in New York City as well in essentially an off year.
Well, Bill, to that point, and what we discussed yesterday with David Kay, I mean, you can go anywhere you want, but I may as well just say, from this perspective, first, if you want to cover this in your response, but one of the things that really got a lot of interest in social media over the last couple of days, of course, is the appointment and the transition team for Zohran Mamdani, as of course, Nina Khan, right? And that is interesting, all things considered, from her position in the FTC. I wonder if you might want to touch upon that in addition to what direction you want to go.
Sure. So super briefly on that, our success at the savings and loan debacle context was in completely transforming an agency that had been facilitating the robber barons into one that had record success in getting rid of them, and then helping the Justice Department create record success in the prosecution of those folks. And our key asset in all of that, and one that we recruited and worked with and praised from the beginning, was the examiners, the lowest level of professionals in the organization, the largest number of people in the organization, because we realized we had to
bring the agency with us, right? You can't just impose these things from a senior position. And that, from folks that we know who know the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, very well, which attempted under her leadership to radically reform the FTC from, again, an organization that largely ignored the robber barons into one that was going to take on the robber barons. But she lost the agency. She lost the staffers, right? Was viewed as arrogant, not supportive, dismissive of the people. Whether or not that's true is sort of not the point. It means that you're going to fail. And it means that they're going to leak adverse information and criticisms to the media constantly about you. So if she's going to, run the transition and the implementation, I hope that she's going to take a lesson from this experience and really bring it from the broadest possible level and be super supportive of those folks and always giving them an aspirational way forward and to actually get things done, because there's nothing that undercuts election victories with big promises like, we can't really get much done, and we have a series of little scandals and such, and pretty soon it's just like, oh, we voted for radical change and we got more of the same. So that's going to be her challenge. The thing I wanted to emphasize was the intersection of Paul and Lewis's areas of expertise. And Lewis brought it up with the sandwich guy. But the sandwich guy is just the first level. What we're seeing is a host of prosecutions and failure to prosecute clearly unlawful assaults by various law enforcement entities, sick, PRENs that have become law abusing agencies, right? And then lying to federal judges. And there was lying in the sandwich trial. This sandwich exploded into me. I could feel it through my ballistic vest. Okay, a ballistic vest like that, it's probably at least level 3, maybe even level 5 if they have the super modern stuff that the U.S. military has. All right. I continued to play soccer at 74. 30 times a day, I get hit harder than that in soccer. And I don't even call a foul, much less try to send somebody away for 10 years on a felony. And then when that's rejected 3 times, try to get them on a misdemeanor, right? These are the so-called alphas, remember? That are going to purge all the ones that aren't physical enough to do the push-ups. This is the biggest bunch of pussies you have ever seen. But more to the point, they lie under oath to try to put Americans in prison. So the next stage is the whistleblowers coming forward and being able to be witnesses in, first, taking away their bar licenses. Second, in blue states, people forget states can bring charges against federal officials if they commit crimes in those states, right? That, in fact, those kind of arrests of a rogue FBI agent, most of them live in Virginia and such. If they abuse their wife, the local cops come and they arrest them. It's not like there's immunity at the federal level for those kinds of crimes. So the next stage is going to be getting the whistleblowers to come forward, disbarring them, and where the states are willing to act, and they should be willing to act in a number of these states, actually prosecuting folks for perjury. Now, I want to see the federal government then come in to block those attempted prosecutions. And I want to see Trump pardoning cop after cop. And they're not really cops, but, enforcement types after enforcement types who are shown to have perjured themselves. And I want to get him to the level where I think he's going to actually, by the end of his term, be creating some kind of flaky federal bar association and saying that you can practice as a Justice Department lawyer if you simply are part of this newly captured ultra right wing bar that they'll create to allow their attorneys to continue even after they're sanctioned. I want to force him to those kind of levels to just make it absolutely glaring to the American people. They don't believe in the rule of law. They will come after you. They will lie. They will use physical violence against even priests simply there in a peaceful fashion on a street where they deliberately throw pepper balls, which, by the way, if a U.S. troop did that against a crowd in Iraq, that would be a war crime, right? We're not allowed to do that even internationally, much less on our own streets. So that's stage 2 and 3.
Well, June, Bill, once again, taking the absurd and then delivering the gravity of the reality, which is what we have to come to grips with. And I got to tell you that over the course of the last several weeks, we're seeing a monumental hockey stick growth of interest in these podcasts, just so you know, guys. The data is really quite extraordinary, as are a lot of important eyeballs getting on this. So the information that you guys are delivering are finally starting to penetrate, and the larger apparatus of the American people are starting to discover this, but obviously not as fast as we'd like them to. So people, please like and subscribe and share. I want to just insert that here, and I'll reiterate it later. But June, to that point, yesterday we had a conversation with David K. Johnston regarding tax policy and the new aristocracy and how it's really same verse, second verse, same as the first. Hundreds of years of this sort of activity, tariffs are corruption and so forth. But a sort of glaring spotlight was shown on these methods of corporate America to destroy the family. I wonder if you could pick up on that in context to what we're seeing today with Snap, obviously, and all things corruption of Donald Trump. And take it away.
So there are these wonderful political science studies, and they show the Republican Party never supports anything that benefits people below the 80th percentile. So it's all for the top. The Democrats, they support the middle. No one supports programs that benefit the bottom third of the country, except maybe for a few things Joe Biden did that nobody ever notices. And when you think about that, that's not just tax cuts for the wealthy. It is also predatory practices aimed at the rest of us. When you look at what destabilizes the family, the lack of a secure job destabilizes the family. So one of the big divides is, have you been unemployed in the last 2 years? College graduates, rarely, although increasing now for the first time. People who don't go to college, yes, and a substantial increase in the post-Reagan era. But it gets worse. What happens when you lose your job and your food stamps and your health care and you can't pay the next bill? There's payday lending, okay, at exorbitant interest rates under terms that make it less likely you can pay it back. What are your employers doing at your next job? Well, one of the new scams is, okay, you're stressed. You really need money today. Sign up here. You can have your paycheck every week instead of once a month. Except what you don't know when you sign up to get your paycheck once a week instead of every month is that there's a financial company that's doing that with all kinds of fees and interest rates you don't know about. So you sign up for it. Yeah, there's some small print somewhere. And all of a sudden, you've got this company taking a big chunk out of your paycheck so you can get your paycheck more frequently, and your employer is getting a cut of that deal. And you certainly didn't understand it, and there's nobody to fight for you. Those are the kinds of things that mean the average worker, the average family hits tough times. You get a speeding ticket and you can't pay, then the fines mount. But it's sent to a private collection agency that makes money by charging you interest on the money you couldn't pay in the first place. So you're paying them money in order to keep your driver's license for maybe years because you can't get out from under the debt. And then when you get stopped another time, you run or try to escape the cop because the next one is going to put you over the top, the next speeding ticket. This is what we're doing to the people at the bottom of the economy. We're squeezing them. We are empowering private companies to squeeze them. We say we want efficient government, which means having, private prisons, private collection agencies, private courts even. And what they are designed to do is to put the screws to the average citizen so they make money and so their constituents can say, you see those ne'er-do-wells over there? We're making them pay. The sadists run the country.
And Paul, that's why guys like you have been around forever. And I'm reminded of the idea that you came from a big family. I would imagine that you guys had to be thoughtful about the way you managed a household, considering that's a lot of mouths to feed. On a personal level, I'm just kind of curious, having come from that sort of background and working your way to the very top of the Department of Justice of the United States, looking at this long view, and I know we've talked a lot, and I don't mean to beleaguer the point because you saw Project 2025 coming a mile away. But I think that June really did open up with sort of a response to Project 2025. And you guys all know the ins and outs of the technocracy and the law and everything that happens from these methodologies and the games that these guys play to pull one over on the families of the American people. And I know you come from a really strong place of fortitude and conscience. I wonder if you can kind of give us some thoughts moving forward of what is a reconciliation sort of scenario that we, the people, can start to put our thoughts towards in dealing with this debacle that we're all in the midst of.
Well, I mean, I think that my experience growing up was an experience that a lot of people have, and that is, you're close to the ground. You see your parents sitting at the table once a month with a checkbook, and they're paying the bills. And the reality is as June just said, people can't pay their bills anymore, and it is really having a huge impact. What I don't understand is that Trump's base seems to still be with him, and a large portion of his base is voting against their economic interests for sure. So I guess what I'd like to hear from June or from anybody as to why they're continuing to stay with him, because they are the ones, in my view, that are most hurt by his policies and what's going on out there now, by inflation, by the effect of the tariffs on us. And I guess I don't understand, other than the cult mentality, how they can still stay with him. Now, I think even if they do stay with him, those people are likely to be dislodged at the midterm because there's not enough of them. And we see what happens when people do come out to vote. I think one of the most important facts I saw was that Trump voters were moving to the middle. The Democrats took back a large swath of the Hispanic vote, of the Black vote, of other types of votes that had leaned towards Trump, probably for economic issues, stupidly, in the last election, in the presidential election. But I just do not understand for the life of me, those people who are in economic straits right now, are still part of the MAGA crowd, and I don't understand how that works. Psychologically, I don't understand that.
I'd like to respond to that. So
Yeah.
the book I'm best known for is called Red Families versus Blue Families. And a large part of what we looked at is, the subtitle is The Creation of Culture. And we were mostly focused on blue because blue families, postponing marriage until into your 30s, but then having two kids with two working spouses. We created an anthem to that and talked about the folks left behind. But the piece that was absolutely striking is what communications do: supply identity, command loyalty. When you look at the communities, especially rural communities left behind, and you say, what institutions are still there? It's churches. And what we were mapping in those studies is the move. When you look at Protestants, what you see is that the middle dropped out of the American church. The mainstream Protestant communities, the Lutherans, the Episcopalians, the Baptists, became much less important. Fundamentalist churches stepped into the breach. The people who were hurting. And what they did is they provided community belonging. Now there's this shift, and mostly I study abortion, and you could see the shift. In the 90s, you have people who were upset by changes in society, by the legalization of abortion. They're deeply religious. They become Republican because of the religious beliefs. After George W. Bush, what you see are the Fed South people, the people who are more educated, who embrace a conservative Republican identity, also pick up a religious identity, even if they weren't all that religious before. The political identity and the religious identity fuse. And when you look at the post first Trump term move, it is that people who are, when you look at these churches, especially in rural communities with a fundamentalist emphasis, you see they're attracting more men, fewer women, and you see that the political identity has fused with religious identity, and that gives it its cult-like focus. And the key, what unites them? The belief the enemy is us. Well-educated elites, certainly professors. I don't know about lawyers, but you can represent the deep state. There are elites who have sold them out. And that sense of grievance is powerful, and it fuses with the fundamentalist strand in churches. One reason California is more liberal, it has one of the smallest percentages of biblical literalists in the country. And my son's partner sent me a piece about, he grew up in a Christian evangelical family. And he sent me a piece about how growing up in that environment primes you for openness to authoritarianism. The patriarchal and somewhat abusive father using corporal punishment is closely associated with a preference for strong leaders.
Wow, that religious theocracy part made me remember a headline that I saw this morning of obviously MBS, Mohammed bin Sultan, is going to be visiting the White House here shortly. And the article in the New York Times said there's a spike in executions in Saudi Arabia that are attributed to a spike in drug use, I guess, which seemed to me to be a little bit like a planted story on all things considered. And it made me think of last week's interview with Donald Trump in 60 Minutes and Norah O'Donnell and all of the ridiculous stuff that many of us have talked about over the course of the last week. But particularly, I think, I don't want to get into too much of that, but I wanted to do that to set you up, Louis, from this perspective. We know how important it is to get legitimate media and legitimate coverage, thoughtful coverage on the whistleblowers within the state legislatures to give a robust story of these insane stories that are happening within the federal government, of which you've prefaced. But we're also dealing with this concerted effort, which is clear to anybody who's been paying attention for decades now, right? You've got the big money through all of these different, organizations, be they the Heritage Foundation or let's say the folks that are involved with the Supreme Court versus, with Leonard Leo and so forth, there's this confusion that's just created this appetite for this, well, let's just put it this way. There's more central control over legitimate media than we've ever seen. How much is that a concern for you, Louis? And based on what you're looking at, obviously you join us week in, week out, and we've got some initiatives underway, but can you just address that from your perspective?
Well, I guess we've had that experience as well in terms of, dealing with the media that we deal with. But at the same time, within those media organizations, they're filled with people who really do believe in a free press, and so therefore there's only a certain amount that they can pull off without the kind of resistance within their own company. So I do think that, and that is very similar to whistleblowing. There has been, as we've seen at 60 Minutes and other places, is that there are journalists within those organizations that are definitely willing to blow the whistle on what's really happening in terms of those institutions, which then does act as a check on some of the sort of, I guess the corporate interests, who have something else to sell to the American public other than the truth.
But just a quick follow-up to that, though, because I thought that was such a powerful response. Did I just hear you say that you're actually engaged with folks that come out of mainstream media institutions that are somewhat, I'm not looking to put you on the spot, but was the inference that there might be whistleblowers afoot out of media willing to discuss this mergers and acquisitions?
Well, no, we don't have whistleblowers who are actually blowing the whistle on media acquisitions, because those are probably legal. But what we do have are the journalists that we work with. I mean, I think we finally put it together that something like 3,100 articles about our clients, over the last 10 months. And in every one of those cases, we have been dealing with journalists who are really committed to telling the truth about, and doing stories that, that reflect that truth. And, and even probably the most, we'll leave out Fox maybe, but anyway, but media organizations, no, that's really not fair. There are many really decent journalists in the Fox system as well. But just to say is that these journalists are committed to getting the word out there and getting the truth out there. And it's in the interest of even some of these corporate dominated media organizations. They still want to sell newspapers. They still want to have people listen to their broadcasts. So they're willing to put the truth out there. And so it is and of all these journalists that we deal with, we have a lot of conversations with those folks, and so that's what we hear about, the kind of pressure that they are sometimes under, and sometimes when the stories maybe aren't as complete as we would like it, it was editorialized a bit, or I mean, it was cut back a bit, but still, I have a lot of faith in the journalists who work at these organizations. I don't necessarily have that faith in their corporate leadership.
Well, I appreciate you answering the question I was trying to think of, but I didn't mean the mergers and acquisitions part of it. But thank you, because that's exactly what I was looking to reflect upon by teeing you up for pretty much our last word here, Bill, depending on how long you want to go. We got about 10 minutes left. But considering what the question was, I mean, I think back to The Insider, right? You remember the movie with Al Pacino, based on the tobacco revelations because of the science and all of the things that took place that preceded the, obviously the state's, what am I trying to say? Class actions against the tobacco companies, but it was obviously against, Philip Morris, I'm sorry, in the connection with, I guess the parent company that was involving. So there's so many different complicated layers here with these huge mergers and acquisitions with these major media plays. So, in context to the whistleblowers, in context to the media, in context to the state legislatures, you have, basically been involved with being strategic, I think, as long as, going back probably long before the savings and loan crisis. What is the strategy, all things considered?
Well, that's a good metaphor or contrast, right? The tobacco crimes are definitely the crimes of the robber barons. They created what was referred to in public health as the tobacco century, in which tobacco usage just expanded remarkably decade after decade. It's what we emphasize, that these kinds of elite control frauds and predators don't, and I using merely in scare quotes, don't merely cost sometimes tens of trillions of dollars in losses. They kill millions of people year after year after year. And they use all the techniques that we've talked about in other contexts, right? They create panels of experts who systematically lie to understate the risk and to suppress the information. There are occasionally whistleblowers, and they perform a massive service, way out of proportion to the relatively small number of them that had access to key documents. But it also shows us the contrast between state and federal litigation. So neither, you'll notice, was willing to ever bring criminal cases against these organizations, nor were they even willing to bring antitrust cases, even though you had a close oligopoly among the tobacco companies, and that even though they did objectively conspire to suppress the information on the incredible losses to human beings through a whole series of misdirection by so-called experts on their part. And in state, and it also shows you the difference between civil litigation by very skilled plaintiffs' lawyers, but private plaintiffs' lawyers. So for 50 years, roughly, the tobacco companies won every civil litigation in America against quite good plaintiffs' attorneys. Then the states got involved, and the states had more resources and more subpoena authority, and they were able to get important information and to get a significant settlement. But it was only when the federal government brought the action and RICO type action with just an extraordinary team put together by the Department of Justice over years and years of litigation. It produced, I believe, the district court opinion is over 2,500 pages. Maybe it's only 1,500. It's just astonishing, and has chapter and verse on how things were done, and that is what finally broke the back of some of the political covering for the industry, and it produced a vastly bigger settlement than the states were able. So that's telling you the difference between relying on civil litigation, attorney generals, and what the Justice Department could bring in a civil case. Now, of course, the ultimate would have been a criminal case by the U.S. Department of Justice. We're going to have to reestablish the capacity of the Justice Department, because they're not just losing attorneys in the fields that are sort of high profile in the press type things. They're bleeding all over, including places like antitrust. Plus, antitrust under what's called the new antitrust, which was right-wing stuff, has largely been gutted for now by Bork, by the way, was one of the key originators for now it's 40 years. So we have to reestablish the capability and the willingness of the Justice Department in a vast range of spheres and have them take on the robber barons.
Well, I'm reminded listening to all of you as we close this out on yet another episode of the new Untouchables, has the biggest crime, known to our country, continues to turn its page. But, recently I've been watching Michael Wolff, the journalist who came out of Vanity Fair, and he is in the midst of a lawsuit. He turned the tables on Melania Trump and all things Donald by way of Epstein and what's happening there. And it's interesting. He, is a pretty transparent guy, pretty funny. I love his style and interesting to boot. But he made this, revelation that he got his first bill from his attorneys, and it took the breath out of him. And he was in the midst of, obviously, a popular campaign. I mean, this is a well-known guy from Vanity Fair, probably lives on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and he's in the midst of a GoFundMe campaign to help with his legal fees. And I want to impress upon the viewers here, you're looking at the all-star panel of some of the greatest legal experts in our country with decades of experience fighting for justice, fighting for truth and integrity in a way that's taken on literally tens of thousands of white-collar criminals. They've convicted thousands and thousands of white-collar criminals that have been involved with billions and billions of dollars of fraud that have led to calamity that 99% of you, unfortunately, aren't even aware of. See, for me, if I could have my way, 99% of this country would be on top of this corruption as we are on sports. And trust me, I'm a sports fan. If we knew the goings-ons of the ins and outs of the whistleblowers that the Government Accountability Project is ushering into us, given the calamity of our institutions failing, instead of you being stuck on your tarmac for 4 hours and complaining on your phone, you should be upfront and proactive in understanding why these things are happening, but more importantly, how we can turn the tables on this. And these folks here, they're not charging you thousands of dollars an hour. They're giving their thousands of hours of experience to you for free out of love for this country. And that is not an understatement. You guys are as humble as they come, and I'm so grateful your time, your expertise. Please, America, like, subscribe, and share. If you're in the media, please reach out to me. I'm in a conduit to all of these folks. We've done some great work with some independent podcasters recently, with a variety of folks with on the No Untouchables, and more to come. This is an active scenario, people, to deal with the monstrosity. And by the way, I will say this to the group. The feedback that I'm getting when people do finally watch what we've been doing, especially a lot of the recent stuff about how we can get the state legislatures with the whistleblowers because of the NDAs and the workarounds with the subpoenas and so forth, their jaw drops. They're like, why aren't I hearing this from my leaders? Why aren't I hearing this from the most senior officials in the Democratic Party? Because they're all playing ball by the oligarchs' rules, my friends. So this is a campaign for no kings and no robber barons. Please check out thenewuntouchables.com. Please check out thecleannewdeal.org. And thank you, as always, for your time to the New Untouchables. And until next time, yeah.
Before we get off, I should note that no matter who we've taken on, as you just talked about, none of us have taken on what Michael Wolff has taken on, and that is going after the winner of the first annual Patriot Award, Melania Trump. That's quite an accomplishment.
I like it.
And I'll leave you with my Irish mother kept us grounded. She quoted always the line attributed to Churchill that it was well that I was modest, for I had much to be modest about.
And on a final note, my view of the elections, when you look at California, you see the future. California is a solidly Democratic state because of Prop 187 that would have denied care in emergency rooms to undocumented immigrants and prevented their children from attending public kindergartens and up. And the Latinos of California are the bedrock of the Democratic Party today. And that may be happening nationally.
Fantastic. Thank you. And on behalf of our missing new untouchable, obviously, Mark, Dan, and thank you all for joining us today. And I look forward to seeing you guys next time. Have a great weekend to everybody. All the best. Thank you. Be well.
Bye.
Take care.